the map on the screen right now? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to be moderating this discussion about directions for energy in Russia and the CIS. And I'd like to start with just a few of my own observations, if I may, which is that in my experience, this is one of the most important yet least understood regions of the world when it comes to energy, and indeed it unarguably holds a position and is often described as an energy superpower in the region. And I'm just going to give you a few quotes and statistics about the region, about Russia, and about the CIS more broadly. Russia has the world's biggest gas reserves. This is just Russia. It has the world's second biggest coal reserves, the world's 8th biggest oil reserves, with 100 billion barrels, 10 billion barrels a day, second only to South Africa in production. And it has been the other way round. The region also has a relatively low domestic consumption. This means that that the whole area is a massive net energy exporter. In the Russian economy alone, not including the other CIS countries, we're looking at energy as representing 60% of exports, 30% of GDP. It's also the biggest landlocked region in the world. Russia is, of course, the largest country in the world, but the CIS more generally is a huge landlocked area. And you have two sublinks, if you like. China on the one side and Europe on the other side, two other large landlocked areas. And you've got to ask, the main challenge in dealing with Russia and CIS energy issues is therefore one of logistics. It's getting cargoes around these landlocked areas from the centre to the two sides, to Europe and to China, if you like. What's driving all of this? What's driving it is mainly global demographics. We've, at last approximate counts, there are 7.3 billion people in the world. It looks like within the next 15, 20 years, that's going to be up to something like 9 billion people. The growth areas are not going to be Europe so much. They're going to be other parts of the world, in particular the Indian subcontinent, China and Africa. Oil is a consumption product. The more people there are, the more oil people are going to want to consume. Prices are lower, which again suggests that people are going to want to be consuming more oil. Russia is the largest non-OPEC member, and it has had a number of discussions with OPEC. It's been invited to join OPEC in the past, and there are ever more discussions with OPEC about the relationship between Russia and the OPEC bloc. Russia and the CIS are an enormously important part of the geopolitical puzzle that is modern energy supply and consumption for the world. Its analysts believe that incremental demand will mostly be supplied by non-OPEC countries over the next 20 years, including Russia and the Commonwealth of Independent States. So the big question is who can supply an increasing population and incremental GDP reliably with energy? And the answer is Russia and the CIS. It's in the middle of everything. And it's tremendously important both for the domestic economies of the region and indeed for the global economy that the oil and gas continue to flow. With those initial thoughts, I'd like to introduce our panel today, very briefly, a few comments about each of them, so that you understand the different perspectives that each one is going to be bringing to the discussion. The first speaker will be Peter Hendry, who has 30 years of experience as a senior oil trader, working throughout the Russia and CIS. He's currently the head of trading at Nekton Global. The next speaker will be Murat Sitnikosov, who has been the Managing Director of Integral Petroleum here in Geneva for the past eight years, a company with massive experience in the Caspian. The next speaker will be Mamuka Bhattacharya, who we're very grateful has come from Georgia today, because he is the CEO of Georgian Railways for the last 3 years, a key artery through the Caucasus region. And our final speaker will be Maciej Kołczkowski, from who is the lead oil and gas industry at the World Economic Forum, an institution I also know well, who's going to bring his own global view on issues of supply and demand and developments of the Russia and CIS oil and gas sectors. With those initial comments, ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to our panellists. The first of you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Peter Hendry. I'm working for Nekton. Thank you, Matthew, for your words of introduction. It's a pleasure to be here speaking to you today. And I must also congratulate Matthew on not falling off the podium as he walked back in his seat just now. I will already correct one thing he said. Clearly he meant Saudi Arabia and not South Africa when he's talking about importance of crude oil. Clearly the man is just back from a holiday in Cape Town. So I say that because in this panel, with me as a start, they've set the bar very low, and it can only go higher. And I imagine I will put up a lot of data which a lot of you will dispute and correct. So, how to talk about Russia in 10 minutes? It's an impossible task, but I should try and compress it, put up a few items for consideration, give you some of our insights, if that's what we can call them, and talk a little bit about where we see the importance of development within Russia. If I could have the next slide, please. Oh, I have to be here, don't you? Excuse me. Drive on the right, drive on the left. There we go. This is my no-flies on Freddy slide, my get-out-of-jail-free card. Anything you hear me say is my own personal opinion and nothing to do with that as a company. Okay? Just a quick word about Nekton, a quick plug. I won't spend too long on this. It's a company that probably nobody has heard of before because it's a brand new company. It was only registered last year, registered in Dubai. I have to be careful what I say because we're only registered to give investment advice in Dubai and nowhere else. But the last 2 points there, we are quite bullish on Russian opportunities, and we believe we might be your ideal partner if any of you think you're splashing out the odd $1 billion on investment in Russia, particularly in the northwest, the top left-hand corner, the Yamal, the Nets or Yamal Oblast area. And that's our geographical spread. Enough of the plug. We want to talk about Russia. It's a big place. On the right-hand side, you have the Pacific coast, ports relatively close to Japan and China. On the left-hand side, you have a Black Sea coast, a Caspian Sea coast, a Baltic coast, and all the way along the top, you have an Arctic coast, which we think is going to become of more and more importance as we go forward. Things to consider when we talk about Russia are on the board in front of you there. I think there are far too many points there for us to cover in detail, and so what I want to do is just highlight a couple of those main points. The first one, why is Russia so important today, and why will it remain important going into the future? Russia is an enormous exporter of resources, particularly energy resources. Today we're talking about energy, so we're going to talk mainly about hydrocarbon. I'm going to focus most on oil and gas rather than coal. We have, I put it up in trillions of feet, hoping that nobody would correct me and give me cubic meters. Bullshit battles brains, I hope we'll see. We can edit that bit out. 90% of their gas exports in 2014 were to Europe, and it made up about 14% of the total export revenue for Russia. Russia's export revenues in 2014 were around the $500 billion mark, and we've already heard that the energy resources made up probably around 67% of those export revenues. So as well as exporting gas, clearly Russia exports a great deal of crude oil and progressively more and more condensate now. Russia produces something of the order of 10.9 million barrels of crude oil per day, of which roughly half is exportable, and there is a considerable quantity of oil products also exported. There are the numbers in front of you at the present moment. I'm quite surprised to see the fuel oil number still remaining so high and the diesel gas oil number still remaining so low, but more about that in a short while. What's clear, though, is that Russia and Europe remain very dependent upon one another. Europe's dependent on Russia as a source of supply for both oil and natural gas, and Russia is dependent on Europe as a very important, the most important market for its oil and gas. But things are changing, and the sanctions that came about in 2014 are partly responsible for those changes. I thought you might be interested to see just some very recent headlines about who is investing in Russia and what they are investing in. So January of this year, we had the Davos summit, I think, organized by the World Economic Forum. Dubai Port World agreed at that summit to make some quite sizable investments in infrastructural development in Russia. In February, President Putin invited the heads of several large conglomerates to the Kremlin for a chat, and he said that he wanted everybody to think about the potential for privatizing their companies, or at least selling some shares in them. February also saw General Electric, the big American company, which has really almost given up on being a bank and is going back into being other things, including an oil operator, also making commitments to invest in Russia. March of this year, several